Welcome to The Debate. Today we confront, well, a truly profound and revealing crisis of modern existence: the unseen impact of noise pollution on human consciousness and spiritual well-being. Our source material frames silence not merely as some kind of luxury we might occasionally indulge in, but fundamentally as a spiritual birthright. And the central question emerging from this is, I think, deeply consequential. Does the pervasive, scientifically verified impact of external noise pollution fundamentally undermine spiritual development? Does it create a kind of biological barrier to transcendence? Or can internal contemplative practices effectively neutralize this sensory assault, allowing us to achieve true recollection regardless of the environment? That's really the crux of it, isn't it? Exactly. And I'll be arguing the position that external noise acts as a profound physiological and societal barrier. It's something that must be addressed through environmental and, structural changes before significant, widespread spiritual growth and genuine peace can really take root.
And I'll contend that the true spiritual goal is the cultivation of an internal capacity, what traditions call inner silence, which, when it's truly mastered, allows the seeker to, transcend external noise. While the damage caused by acoustic contamination is absolutely undeniable, the deepest wisdom traditions teach us how to cultivate presence in any circumstance, not just when we happen to find ourselves in an acoustic sanctuary.
Okay, I see why you emphasize that internal capacity, but the sheer physical scale of the problem demands we prioritize the external environment first. External noise pollution isn't just an annoyance you can sort of mentally tune out. It's now recognized as a genuine public health emergency. When the World Health Organization estimates that noise steals, and steals is their word, at least 1 million healthy life years annually in Western Europe alone, we have to recognize this relentless modern symphony of traffic, sirens, pings. It's a profound public threat.
1 million years is staggering. I agree.
It is. And Schopenhauer, he called this relentless sound a spiritual violation, a sensory trespass. And you know what? The neuroscience backs him up. We are talking about concrete biological impediments to inner peace. Chronic noise triggers significant neuroplasticity changes. It forces the amygdala, the brain's fear center, into hyperactivation. It keeps the autonomic nervous system in this chronic, low-grade fight-or-flight mode. And this constant state elevates stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. So, when the nervous system remains perpetually stuck in a defensive posture, the subtle awareness and the open receptivity required for deep spiritual states, whether you call it Sufi scoot, that profound inward stillness, or the Christian via negativa, the path of unknowing, it becomes physiologically almost impossible. The body's always signaling danger. For widespread spiritual growth, tackling the external noise isn't optional. It's, I argue, a physiological prerequisite.
That's a powerful argument regarding the physical toll, absolutely. But I think you might be focusing too much on the contaminant, perhaps, and not enough on the proven antidote that traditions have offered for millennia. Silence, I'd argue, is fundamentally an internal capacity, not merely an external condition.
Okay.
Across incredibly diverse traditions, you look at Buddhist noble silence, Vedic Mona. Silence is venerated not as the absence of sound, but as a robust presence. It's often described as a fertile void, where higher awareness blossoms, precisely because it has been intentionally cultivated within.
But how does that cultivation happen when the biology is compromised?
Well, think about it. If noise renders deep states physiologically impossible, how do we account for the long history of spiritual seekers who achieved enlightenment or deep insight in conditions of strife, in busy cities, or during monastic hardship? Practices like pratyahara, the yogic practice of conscious sensory withdrawal, or focusing on space between thoughts, as Eckhart Tolle might put it, they are specifically designed to access this internal stillness regardless of the decibel level outside the window. Focusing solely on noise reduction risks making the spiritual life conditional on factors we often cannot control. True spiritual life, as the source defines it, is defined by recollection, the power to remain inwardly gathered, whole, despite the external fragmentation.
If we look, though, at the cognitive consequences of that external fragmentation, we see precisely how it undermines the capacity for internal recollection, especially over the long term.
How so?
Well, when the brain is perpetually busy filtering out this constant acoustic assault, dealing with the orienting response, that automatic shift of attention toward any sudden noise, it drains the cognitive reservoir needed for sustained inner work. This isn't just about feeling stressed. Studies consistently show cognitive erosion, memory deficits, fragmented attention in chronically noisy environments. So how can you realistically expect complex ethical development or sustained contemplation when the very resources for high-level thought are constantly being redirected to mere sensory filtering? We risk what medical anthropologists have termed spiritual numbness. And the source material is quite clear on this. We adapt. Yes, we think we're fine because we've gotten used to it. But, and this is the key quote, getting used to something and thriving are two different things. That adaptation masks a steady, dangerous loss of sensitivity, a deafness, not just to physical sound, perhaps, but to our own inner voice, to the subtle whispers of transcendent experience. If the inner life requires refined sensitivity and noise systematically dulls that sensitivity, then the external acoustic environment is, I believe, fundamentally compromising the entire spiritual enterprise.
I come at it from a slightly different way. I see the internal practices as designed specifically to address and even maybe invert that sense of depletion by fundamentally altering one's relationship with the sound itself. This transforms the experience of noise rather than demanding its elimination.
Transforming the experience.
Exactly. For instance, consider the contemplative approach of sound as anchor or sound meditation. This involves bringing full, non-judgmental awareness to the environmental sounds. So instead of fighting the sounds, labeling them as a contaminant, one accepts them fully into the field of awareness. The noise is transformed into a teacher of presence. As figures like Julian of Norwich suggested, all experience, even disturbance, can be potential revelation. This method develops profound cognitive flexibility, the ability to hold seemingly opposing truths, like the sound is loud and I am still present. The material notes this flexibility is absolutely essential for genuine spiritual growth. Someone who achieves stillness amid the car horn has cultivated a resilience that's far more powerful and, frankly, far more portable than someone who requires perfect silence. The chaos itself becomes the material for transformation.
That's a compelling philosophical argument, I grant you, for the resilience of the human spirit. But haven't you considered how this perspective, when applied broadly, might minimize the really critical issue of systemic and economic inequality? Your prescription, it seems to me, risks overlooking the severe structural injustice of the noise burden. This isn't always about an individual's failure to practice pratyahara. Often, it's about inescapable, systemic, external barriers.
Okay, explain that further.
The studies are alarmingly clear. Noise is not evenly distributed. Neighborhoods with lower socioeconomic status bear a wildly disproportionate burden. We're talking about, for instance, predominantly black neighborhoods in major U.S. cities experiencing noise levels roughly 8 decibels higher than predominantly white ones. And that disparity persists even when controlling for income. 8 decibels isn't trivial. It represents a massive, objective difference in environmental quality. This is an external, systemic violation that actively denies the very opportunity for quiet to marginalized communities. Chronic noise pollution, as we know, compromises sleep architecture, it disrupts children's ability to learn, it exacerbates chronic illnesses, it demands constant energy just for biological survival. So when we frame the solution purely as high-level internal work, we effectively ask those facing constant auditory assault to overcome a structural obstacle that wealthier communities can simply pay to escape by moving to quieter suburbs or living in better insulated homes. Reclaiming silence, I argue, must involve collective action, sound design, community silence agreements. We have to protect silence as a public good before we demand superhuman sensory withdrawal from those under constant siege.
I absolutely agree that the inequality of the noise burden is a severe moral crisis, a public health crisis. It is structural violence, and yes, structural problems demand structural responses. However, and this is crucial, this very inequality, I believe, strengthens the argument for the primacy of internal practice as a means of,
justice, and empowerment in the face of that inequality.
How does that follow?
Because for those who cannot afford to wait for policy changes, or who simply cannot afford to move, internal practices offer the most powerful, non-contingent form of liberation and dignity available right now. If we rely solely on external structural change, then true peace becomes perpetually conditional on political will or financial circumstance. That essentially means the most vulnerable are perpetually denied peace until their environment is somehow reformed from the outside, which could take generations, if ever. The source material itself provides specific protocols, practical techniques for noisy environments, things like focusing on counting prayer or body-centered awareness, precisely because external quiet is so often elusive, especially for the marginalized. Internal resilience cultivated through rigorous spiritual practice is a necessary, portable antidote to the loss of control imposed by chronic noise. It offers immediate access to a measure of dignity, self-sovereignty, and peace, regardless of your postal code.
I'm still not convinced that framing internal practice as the ultimate liberation for the disadvantaged adequately addresses the essential biological necessity of external silence for healing. Let me give you a different perspective here, based not just on stress reduction, but on findings related to neurogenesis, the actual creation of new brain cells. Silence doesn't just relieve stress. It seems to be an active agent in healing and growth. Research suggests it actively facilitates the growth of new neurons in the hippocampus, the region critical for memory, learning, emotional regulation.
The neurogenesis point is fascinating. Yes.
It is. It means external silence acts almost like a biological nutrient. It facilitates the neural processes essential for what the material calls psychological integration, forming the very substrate of self-understanding. Without this physical nutrient, the quiet that allows the brain to heal, to consolidate, to rebuild, the foundation for deeper spiritual growth is, arguably, structurally compromised. The brain needs downtime to process and consolidate information. Noise fundamentally compromises this. You can't maintain a high-level spiritual practice, I'd argue, if the basic hardware, the nervous system itself, is constantly being degraded by the acoustic environment.
Okay, while the neuroscience of silence, the talk of alpha waves, hippocampal growth, is undeniably important for health and cognitive function, I worry it risks reducing the profound concept of sacred silence to mere measurable neural activity. If silence is only valuable because it demonstrably produces neuron growth, have we fundamentally missed the transcendent goal of the contemplative life? You speak of the brain's hardware. Let's discuss what happens when we try to quiet that hardware. You're touching on concepts like the default mode network, right? The part of the brain active during mind-wandering, self-referential thought. And yes, neuroscience links deep meditation to quieting the DMN, but traditional concepts, think of Rumi's eloquence in silence, define that stillness not just as cognitive housekeeping, but as a fullness, as a vessel for divine communion.
A fullness?
Yes. The goal is transcendent awareness, those moments where the boundaries of the self dissolve. And that cannot be solely explained by the activity, or lack thereof, of specific neural networks. The focus I maintain must remain on cultivating radical receptivity to the sacred, which requires transcending rather than relying upon measurable external quiet. We seek communion and transformation, not just improved memory and reduced cortisol levels, important as those are.
To summarize my position then, the pervasive nature of modern noise pollution, validated by substantial public health and neurological data on chronic stress, on amygdala hyperactivation, it's a profound, often unacknowledged obstacle to widespread spiritual flourishing. To ignore the physical reality of acoustic contamination is, I think, to deny basic human physiology. Reclaiming silence requires intentional sound design, yes, but also community action, and the recognition that external acoustic sanctuary is a necessary precondition for cultivating the internal life. It must be defended as a collective resource for consciousness.
And, my summary, the spiritual journey ultimately demands the capacity for recollection. That is, the ability to maintain internal composure and presence, the silence within, regardless of external fragmentation.
While external noise is clearly harmful, and yes, we must fight it structurally, the most profound and liberating spiritual discovery is that inner silence remains accessible through dedicated, non-contingent practices like pratyahara. This capacity empowers the seeker, offering internal liberation even, perhaps especially, in the noisiest world imaginable.
So we've explored whether silence must be fundamentally found externally as a kind of biological and environmental necessity, or whether it must be cultivated internally as the primary capacity.
And ultimately, the material seems to reveal that the pursuit of well-being requires us to honor and protect both. Both the external soundscape, demanding justice for our acoustic environment, and the internal landscape, cultivating the inherent power of our own consciousness. The path to silence, it seems, demands diligence, really on both fronts.